Welcome everyone! Today we'll learn how to create an Angular login logout application using AspNetCore Identity and JWT tokens. So let's download the sample code from this GitHub repository. I'll download the initial branch. So copy the link and clone the repository. Open the project. This project is based on a clean architecture scheme. You can check out my video about what is clean architecture. And we need two prerequisites for this demo. The first one is to add the AspNetCore Identity configuration. You can check out my video about how to register an user for an Angular form using AspNetCore Identity. So in the infrastructure layer, let's go to the persistence project. We have the DB context, okay, which inherits from identity DB context, and we pass the user entity. The user entity simply inherits from the default identity user from AspNetCore Identity. And in the persistence installers, we add the persistence services. We add identity with the user entity and the default identity role. We add the DB context entity framework store, and we add the connection with a SQL Server database with this line by using a connection string located in the settings.json and using SQL Express as a SQL Server database. The second prerequisite is to handle JSON tokens. You can check out my video about JSON tokens authentication with AspNetCore. So in the infrastructure layer, we have the JWT service, which we generated the token, okay, by adding some claims based on the user entity. We add the ID and email claims to attach to the token. We generate the token by using this JWT secret, which is the private key. Is located in the settings.json, is a random value to sign the token, okay, and we generate the token here. Now in the infrastructure installers, we add or register the JWT service. We add the JWT Authentication by defining this scheme as a default, as you can see, and add the JWT configuration to sign the token by using the private key and add authorization. So if you go to the program.cs file, we add the persistent services, which are the AspNetCore Identity configuration and the connection with the SQL Server database. And in the infra services, we add the JSON Web Tokens configuration. Now we'll create a login handler to sign in. So for this demo, the last prerequisite is to use the MediatR pattern to create a login handler. So in the application layer, you will see this application installers with I register MediatR from assembly by using this MediatR NuGet package. So go to the program and we register this service. And finally, we add authentication and authorization middlewares to the pipeline. Now let's proceed to the demo. The first step is to create the login handler. So in the application layer, add a new class called login handler. I provide all the video links in the description below. So in the login handler, we'll implement this iRequest handler interface by defining the request type, which will be login request. And the response will be a string based on the token. So create a new login request class. This login request implements the iRequest interface by defining the response type. We add two properties. The first one will be the user email and the second one will be the password. Let's implement this interface to add the handle method. So in this method, we'll add all the sign-in functionality. So to sign in, we need three dependencies. So by a primary structure, we'll add the dependencies. The first one will be the user manager, type user, to find the user by email. Okay, this is the first dependency. The second one will be the JWT service to generate the token. And finally, add the sign-in manager dependency to sign in. Okay, define read-only fields for each dependency. And now in the handle method, we'll get the user based on the email. So we call user manager.find by email async by passing the email which comes from the request. Then we will get the result from the sign-in method, which comes from the sign-in manager that password sign-in async. We pass the user, the password, and two parameters which are optional. And finally, if the result is successful, we'll generate and return the token. So let me add a ternary operator. If the result is okay, this is an asynchronous operation, so add the await keyword. So if it's successful, we'll return the token by passing the user as a parameter, otherwise we'll return null. We will not add validations to the login request parameters for simplicity, and that's the core functionality for the sign-in, and that's the sign-in functionality. We get the user from the user manager, we try to sign in using the user and the password, and then if it's successful, we generate and return the token, otherwise we'll return a null value. Now go to the program.cs file and create the minimal API endpoints. So you can see I added CORS to allow requests for external sources, in this case for an Angular application. So add the first post HTTP request to login. Okay, so add a root login and define the delegate. In the delegate, we receive from body the login request. Okay, and then we inject a mediator interface to send this object to the corresponding handler by calling mediator.send, passing the login request, and that's it. The second endpoint will be an get action to simulate that we're authorized, okay, and then we'll return a simple message, a simple string called signing was successful, and we'll add the authorization attribute to this API endpoint by passing the JSON web token, okay, and that's it. Now go and create an Angular application. So I'll open VS Code, and in a terminal I type ngn, define the name of the application, I'll inline the styles, skip tests, and select the defaults for simplicity. Open the app containing folder. In the browser, I will use a login form template from Bootstrap MDB. So I will use this variation number 9, which is a simple login form. So let me copy the HTML code. Go to the Angular application, open a terminal. I'll create a new component in the add folder. So use ngGC using the Angular CLI to create a component called login. Expand the add folder and go to the HTML. So copy the HTML template and remove this div, which contains the forgot password and remember me fields. Now install MDB Bootstrap to apply the styles. So go to the second link. I'll provide the links in the description below. So in this installation guide, I will scroll down and copy this command. Go back and in the terminal paste the command and define all the defaults. Install Angular MDB Bootstrap. It's done. Now go to the TypeScript file and add two properties. First one will be for the email, and the second one for the password. So let's use Angular template forms to bind the form controls to these properties. So in the import section, we'll add the fonts module to use the ng model directive. Okay. Now go to the HTML and in the email form control, define the ID. Now the name attribute and use the ng model directive to bind the property to this form control. Similarly for the password, define the ID, the name, and add the ng model directive. And finally, add in the sign-in button a click event to call a login method, a login function from the TypeScript file. So we'll send an HTTP request to login to our API endpoint. So register or add in the import section the HTTP client module, and by a construction, we'll add the HTTP client. Now call HTTP.post. The idea is to get the token, and then we define, we'll pass the API URL. Go back to Visual Studio and run the solution. Copy the URL, paste it here, and add the root, which is login, the endpoint. Okay. Define the body. Will be an object with email and password properties. So pass the email and the password. And finally, in the headers, I'll add the response type as text because we will just receive the token and not a JSON response. So let's define as any to prevent any error, and then subscribe to the observable to get the token. So when we subscribe, we'll store the token in local storage, so call local storage that set item to store the token value, define the key and pass the value, and then we will route to another component, which will be the home component. So in the import section, let me add the route module and inject the route service by a constructor. So we just simply call route that navigate by URL and navigate to the home route. Now it's time to create the home component. So in the add folder, let's generate another component called home. Okay, so this home component, we will create a simple response property to show in the HTML file, which is the response from the API endpoint. Okay, it's also an string. Go to the HTML, remove this sample code, and add a simple if condition to verify if response is not null, it's not empty. We'll display the response, okay, response string. Now in this home component, in the onInit method, so implement the onInit interface, and in the ng onInit, we just simply call the second endpoint to get the message using the better token. So how to do that? Similarly, from the login component, we will send an HTTP request to add the HTTP client module in the import section. Let me copy the constructor to inject the HTTP client at the corresponding import. And then in the onInit method, we'll call http.get. We expect to receive a string, and then copy the URL, which will be the same with a different route. Go back to the project and call this endpoint, the home endpoint. Okay, and add in the header section, here is important to define the authorization header by passing the better token. So this header will be authorization, and then the value will be better. Using backticks, we'll interpolate the token value. So how to get the token? By creating a variable and calling local storage to get item with the same key. Okay, and then pass this token to the authorization header and define also the response type as text, because we will receive a simple response message, and then subscribe to the observable. In this case, we'll handle two callbacks. The first one is the next callback, which we get the response, the successful response. We'll set the response variable from the response, and the second one will be the error callback function for any error. Basically, if we're not authorized, we'll receive a 401 status code. So we just simply navigate to the login page. So to navigate, we need to import the router module and then inject the router service by construction, and then navigate to the login route. Okay, to the login component. So it will be the default route. Okay, now go to the routes and define the two routes. Okay, the first one will be the default for the login component. So we'll load a particular component. So call import and add the relative path. So invoke the login component. Okay, and the second route will be for the home component. So the path will be home, and then replace this login as home and invoke the home component. We have the two simple routes, the default route, which is the login component, and the home component. And finally, add a logout functionality in the home component. Basically, in the HTML, we'll add a simple button to log out. Okay, add a click event called logout. Create this logout function, and here we'll remove the token from local storage. So call local storage dap remove item by passing the key, and then navigate to the default login component, which is the default route, and that's it. Now it's time to test the application. Run ngs to serve the application. I forgot to add in the add component.html the router outlet directive to dynamically load the routes based on the URL. So refresh the website and navigate to the Angular application. As you see, we have the email and the password fields and the sign in button. So we need to pass the credentials for a user. So in the SQL Server database, I'll open the SQL Server Object Explorer, expand the SQL Express database. As you will see in this database, in this DemoDB, in the Ask.NET Users table, let's view the data. And I created a simple user. So let me copy the email. And we cannot copy the password because it's hashed. So I'll copy the value for the password and click sign in. Let me open the DevTools console, click sign in. As you can see, we're performing two requests. The first one is the login request, which returns a successful status code. In the payload, we pass the email and the password, and the response, we have the bird token. And then we route to the home component. The home component also calls the get API endpoint. It returned a successful status code. And if you scroll down in the headers, we pass in the authorization header with the bird token, and we get the response, which is the message. Okay, so far so good. Now click Logout to remove the token from local storage. You can see this value in the application tab. You see local storage. In this particular website, we have the token value stored. So click Logout. You can see the key is removed. If you try to navigate to the home component, it will redirect to the default login component, and in the console tab you will see that error that the endpoint has failed because we're not authorized. The endpoint returns an 401 status code. So let me clear the console and log in again. Let me copy the email and the password, sign in, and we successfully created an Angular login logout application using AspNetCore Identity and JSON tokens.